This is a presentation on Morton Sobell, a Soviet Union spy. The purpose of this presentation is an analysis of Morton Sobell's history, which describes relevant recruitment tactics he used and the act of espionage. It also includes possible psychological issues and comparisons to other cases of espionage. History. Morton Sobell was born on April 11, 1917 in New York City to Jewish parents. He was a son of Russian-born immigrants. He attended the City College of New York, in which he graduated in June 1938. He obtained an engineering degree, and he was classmates with Julius Rosenberg and Max Ehrlicher, who would later prove to be two of the most important people in his life. In 1942, he received a master's degree in electrical engineering from the University of Michigan. It is here where he's shown that he was very politically inclined and active, and in 1938, he worked at a communist-controlled camp as a maintenance man in Wingdale, New York. It is here where one can say that his communist ideals were highly developed, and it is also here where he had access to classified information. January 27, 1939 is when he moved to Washington, D.C., and he began working for the Navy Bureau of Ordnance. While there, he was an assistant electrical engineer and he finally decided to resign in 1940, in which he moved back to New York. While he worked at the Navy Bureau, he lived with and worked with his friend. For his family, he married Helen Levelitz in Arlington, Virginia on March 10, 1945. They had one child together, a son named Mark Sobell, and Helen had a daughter, Sidney Goretwitz Clemens, from a previous relationship. He had a powerful personality with a seemingly trustworthy sense. He was good friends with both Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, and when he finally decided to move, he moved to D.C. with his friend Max. It is here where he tried to recruit Max to partake in espionage acts with him for the Soviet Union. Ehrlicher stated that Sobell influenced him to join the Communist Party in 1939. They both attended meetings together in their apartment building, which now is known to be communist meetings. To escape and be found. He fled to Mexico City, Mexico with his family. His family included his son and his daughter, as well as his wife. When they fled, they tried to go to Europe, but they did not have the proper paperwork to leave, which is why they decided to go to Mexico instead of Europe. It is here also where Mexican authorities deported him and his family and took them out of their country. Upon this, they were taken to custody by the FBI and transferred to Laredo, Texas, and to be questioned by all the authorities there. For his discovery. In 1951, Sobell and the Rosenbergs were found guilty of conspiring to commit espionage for the Soviet Union. They were convicted of releasing nuclear missile information to the USSR. In 1953, the Rosenbergs were both sentenced to death and were electrocuted. Sobell, however, got a lighter sentence and was sentenced to 30 years in prison and served almost 20 years, and he was finally released in 1969. He was also located at Alcatraz until it closed in 1963. Here we have from the FBI, which is released from the Rosenberg-Sobell trials. Both these paperworks are about how there was a spy in our government and they were giving our secrets back to the USSR. The title of the first one, it's a little hard to make out, but it's The The New York engineer is fugitive spy in Texas, so that's when he was basically given over to the FBI and were questioned by the authorities there. The second picture on the right. Then for these two, we also have more documents, and it also just says Queen engineer seized at Laredo on charges of aiding Russian king. And on the right, we have a New York man held as a spy in Texas. So all four of these documents that we see were used in the trial and were shown to be pretty prominent evidence as to that he was definitely involved with giving nuclear missile information to the USSR. For psychological issues, he was highly radical and considered Julius Rosenberg a camaraderie, which is a term that he said to Anvanier, who was a New York Sun reporter. I find it ironic that he calls him a camaraderie because a camaraderie is defined as a companion who shares one's activities or is a fellow member of an organization. I find that very ironic because he does not use the word friend. He uses camaraderie, which kind of shows his psychological distance in a way and his inability to form really very close relationships. He told this New York Sun reporter David Anvanier psychological issues continued. He could not get involved personally with people. He did not easily become hurt, and if he was hurt, he thought it was his own fault because he let his guard down. Also, Helen wrote him 2 poems while he was in prison, and he admitted to being too materialistic, which was a downfall of his marriage. However, ironically, he felt powerless to Helen, which shows that he was definitely in love with her, and that his only weakness was Helen and no one else. Personality, as far as the DSM criteria, possibly access to personality disorders. Cluster B, he was possibly a narcissist. He became obsessed with power, status, and wealth, which is probably why he got so involved with espionage for the USSR, because it provided major opportunity. He also thought extraordinarily high of himself, and he thought very low of others, which also can be correlated back to the fact that he only considered Rosenbergs as camaraderies because they weren't on the same level as him. He only thought of Julius Rosenberg as a camaraderie, as I just said, which showed that. As for the conclusion of their case, in 1951, he was convicted of espionage and sentenced to 30 years in prison. However, he was released only after 18 years, although some records do say it was 17 years and 9 months. In 1969, he was released from prison, and up until 2008, Sobell continued to state that he and the Rosenbergs were victims of political persecution and were innocent because they did not indeed spy for the Soviet Union. In this conclusion of the case, on September 11, 2008, Sobell gave a monumental interview to Sam Roberts of the New York Times. It is here that he admitted to being a Soviet spy and compromising nuclear information to the USSR. The ironic part of all this was he said that the information that he gave to the USSR was useless because it was all junk, which might be Sobell's way of rationalizing his actions. Also in this interview, he implicated Julius Rosenberg. Some interview questions that could possibly be asked for him. What was a major influence in your decision to partake in espionage? How would you describe your relationship with your wife Helen as well as the Rosenbergs? Do you feel any sort of guilt or remorse regarding the actions you have taken? And what made you tell the New York Times the actual story? As for the sources used in this presentation, they are all credible sites. The Rosenberg case has been widely researched and major data has been collected, and also all information of the trial has been released by the FBI.